Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel. Enjoy the listening. The enemy took one look at Earth's fleet and saw the end coming. They called themselves the Valnari, a cold-blooded pride species with sleek silver armor and ships that blocked out stars. For centuries, they ruled the outer systems with one rule: submit or be erased. Earth didn't even show up on their maps until humanity sent a mining probe too far into contested space. It was supposed to be a quiet operation: dig some ore, fund a colony, move on. But humans had a bad habit of not asking for permission, especially from aliens who thought they were gods. The probe was shot down within minutes, a warning. But Earth didn't blink. Instead, they sent a message, short, blunt, and human as hell: "We're coming to get our stuff. Try and stop us." The Valnari intercepted the message, expecting laughter in their war chambers. But instead silence fell, because attached to the message was an image. One grainy still from a surveillance drone, sent by accident or maybe on purpose. It showed Earth's fleet, not graceful or elegant, not polished or shiny like Valnari war cruisers. No. Earth's ships looked like floating slabs of metal, ugly and brutal, covered in black armor with weapons stitched across every inch, engines that burned like hellfire. It was the kind of fleet built not for ceremony or pride, but for one thing: total war. Admiral Cirque of the Valnari stared at that image for a long time. He didn't speak, didn't even blink, just narrowed his red, insect-like eyes as a sick chill crept into his bones. "What is this barbaric design?" one of his officers finally whispered. "Not design," Cirque murmured, "instinct, because something in those ships spoke louder than strategy or tech." It screamed of desperation, of a species that had crawled through mud and fire just to survive. A species that hadn't known peace in centuries, but had learned to turn pain into fuel. And then came the reports: battles, skirmishes, Nari squadrons vanishing in asteroid belts, interceptors torn apart by railgun slugs the size of freight trains, a battleship cleaved in two by a human dreadnought ramming it on purpose. They weren't just fighting humans, they were fighting madness wrapped in steel. Ships with names like Retribution, Blood Price, Forgive Us Not, names that sounded less like warships and more like final confessions. Sir watched as sector after sector went dark. Planets burned, fleets retreated. The humans didn't speak much. They didn't boast, but they didn't stop either. And when the Valnari High Command demanded a meeting to assess Earth's threat, Cirque only said one thing: "We made a mistake. They don't want peace, they want us to bleed." Still, the command didn't listen, not until Earth's fleet appeared at the edge of the Valnari core system. Engines howling, guns hot, 1,000 ships strong, led by the SCS Ashes of Terror, its hull scarred with every war humanity ever fought. That's when Cirque saw it again, that look, the same one he saw in the fleet image, the same look he now saw in the eyes of their pilots, visible through cracked glass and warp-painted cockpits. It wasn't hate, it was something worse. It was purpose. The first shot wasn't a warning. It came from the Ashes of Terror, a rail cannon slug that tore through vacuum like a divine hammer. It punched a clean hole through the Valnari Outer Defense Station, one of their proudest achievements, something they believed to be impenetrable. It shattered like glass. No speeches, no countdowns, just death. That was Earth's way. The rest of the fleet followed in silence. Hundreds of ships swarmed in like vultures, spreading wide across the system in a crescent formation that didn't care for beauty or tradition. It was a slaughter formation. Every vessel bristled with weapons, and every gun lit up as if it had been waiting centuries for this exact moment. The Valnari scrambled. Their fleets were fast and agile, sleek serpents in the void gliding on plasma trails. But humans didn't fight like dancers, they fought like avalanche and firestorm. For every graceful Valnari cruiser, 3 human destroyers would crash into it like iron fists, not dodging, not maneuvering, just overwhelming. And they kept coming. Valnari Command broadcast a desperate signal to all defensive stations: hold the line, use swarm tactics, strike and retreat. Do not engage directly. But Earth's fleet didn't give them the option. The SCS Hell's memory barreled into a swarm of Valnari fighters, releasing hundreds of drones that didn't bother targeting. They just collided, exploded, or latched on and tore ships apart like parasites. Somewhere in the chaos, a Valnari commander tried to open comms, barking in their sharp, clicking tongue. "We demand a ceasefire. This is a misunderstanding. Earth, stand down." The only reply was static. And then a human voice broke through, low, gruff, calm. "No misunderstanding. You took one of ours. Now we take everything." The Valnari didn't know how to fight this. Their empire was built on fear, on psychological dominance. But the humans, they didn't fear death. They expected it. They had perfected the art of dying with purpose. Suicide runs were common. If a ship was too damaged, it didn't retreat. It plowed into the nearest Valnari target, detonating nuclear cores and shrapnel bombs that turned space into a meat grinder. Humans kept talking, not on public frequencies, but to each other. "We got one of theirs. That makes it even. Number, it doesn't, not yet. Save the last torpedo for their command ship. I want them to watch us coming." The Valnari started retreating, a full-scale pullback from their outer moon stations. For the first time in their empire's long history, they abandoned territory they'd never had to before. Every other species had bowed or been broken, but not Earth. Earth bit back. Admiral Cirque stood aboard the VLS Dominion's claw, his hands shaking as he stared at the tactical map. The humans weren't pushing like they wanted conquest. No, they were spreading like rot. They weren't aiming for military objectives. They were burning population centers, orbital farms, energy silos, anything that made life bearable. It wasn't strategy, it was punishment. "This is not war," whispered one of his aides. "No," Cirque answered coldly. "It's a message," but what was the message? That they would never stop. That Earth had turned pain into doctrine. Or was it that somewhere deep in their history, humanity had made a decision that if anyone ever tried to erase them, they'd make sure it was the last mistake anyone ever made? A new ping flashed on Cirque's console. "Incoming transmission, human flagship priority message." He opened it with a shaky claw. A woman's face appeared, hard eyes, a scar across her brow, wearing a blood-stained uniform. She didn't blink, didn't smile. "You came for minerals," she said. "You left us corpses." Her voice dropped into something cold, something final. "Now we give you graves." The transmission cut. Seconds later, a barrage of thermonukes launched from Earth's second wave fleet, and Cirque knew without a doubt that the end had just begun. The Valnari home world, Jarth, had never tasted fear. It was a jewel of precision, floating crystal spires, gravity gardens that sang with color, and a skyline dominated by the shimmering domes of its command citadel. It was a world that believed in superiority, raised on the certainty that no threat could ever reach its heart. But now, sirens howled across its skis. Admiral Cirque stood in the Grand Council chamber, flanked by trembling ministers and generals who no longer spoke in arrogance but in whispers. The chamber's giant war map, once a proud display of Valnari dominance, now showed a red tide consuming their core systems. 14 planets lost in under a week, entire fleets shredded, trade routes gone, civilians flooding transport hubs, begging to flee. The once-proud Valnari Empire was collapsing not from years of war, but days of rage. "They've reached the Tanari Gap," said Commander Veller, his voice barely steady. "There's nothing left between them and us but Home Guard Fleet Alpha." A voice from the back snapped. "And what good is Alpha if morale's already broken? They're not fighting to win anymore, they're just delaying the slaughter." Cirque slammed his fist onto the console. "Enough, we are not children." But even he couldn't deny the truth. The humans weren't fighting to claim land or resources, they were fighting to erase. It was retribution, systematic, relentless, and scarily personal. "They know where to hit us," another general muttered. "They're not targeting strength, they're targeting shame." He was right. The humans had bypassed major military installations and gone straight for places like the slave colonies of Threx 9, where the Valnari had kept prisoners of war in underground labor pits for decades. Earth didn't liberate those camps, they vaporized them, broadcast the explosion live. And that wasn't all. Somehow human AIs had infiltrated their communications grid. Every Valnari terminal now played hacked audio logs, recordings of Earth's soldiers, families, and civilians killed in cold blood when the probe was shot down, their last moments, their screams. One looped message kept playing on a ghost frequency. "You wanted silence, now we make you hear it." In desperation, the Grand Council turned to the unthinkable, the Omega Protocol. "Chancellor Larath, deploy it before they reach orbit." "No," Cirque growled. "You don't understand. You think this is a war we can still win, but the humans, they've already decided what they are." The chamber went silent. He continued, his voice hollow. "They've decided they are extinction, and they're willing to burn with us to make sure we go first." Even as he spoke, orbital alarms screamed louder. The ashes of terror had entered visual range. It looked worse now, its armor warped, venting black steam like breath from a beast, not a ship. A monument to vengeance. and behind it hundreds more spilling from subspace like swarming insects. Still, the Council voted. Omega Protocol approved. It wasn't a weapon, not exactly. It was a signal, a frequency that bent psionic fields meant to fracture the minds of lesser species, break their will to fight. It had worked before on weak minds, on creatures that feared pain. But when they activated it, nothing happened. No retreat, no panic, no madness. Instead, Earth's fleet surged forward, faster, more focused than before, as if the pain only made them sharper, stronger. Cirque whispered it under his breath, the realization so cold it made his lungs seize. They don't fear pain. He finally understood what the Valnari never could. Earth had never been the strongest species, never the smartest, but they were the ones who survived their own darkness. The ones who learned to wear trauma-like armor, who carved their dead into war chants and loaded grief into torpedoes. The Omega Protocol had failed, and Earth was now over their skis. The sky over Jarthrith turned black, not from nightfall, but from the shadow of Earth's fleet blotting out the suns. The Valnari capital, once the shining center of their empire, now sat beneath a ceiling of fire and metal. The citizens had never seen war up close. They'd always watched it from a distance. Conflict was something that happened out there, far from the glow of their perfect world. But today, war had come home. The ashes of terror hovered directly above the capital's spire, engines growling like a beast ready to strike. Its hull was scorched, bearing the scars of 1,000 battles. Pieces of fallen ships were fused to its sides like trophies. It wasn't here to negotiate. It wasn't here to conquer. It was here to finish what Earth had started. Inside the command deck, Captain Mara Voss stood like stone. Her uniform was torn at the sleeve, soaked in dried blood, some of it hers, most of it not. Her eyes were raw with exhaustion, but sharp and focused. She stared at the capital's coordinates, her finger hovering above the fire command. "Targets locked," her weapons officer said quietly. Valnari High Command confirmed inside the spire. One strike ends their leadership. But Myra didn't press the button. Not yet, because she wanted them to watch. "Open wide frequency channel," she ordered. Seconds later, her face appeared on every screen across Jarthrith, hijacking news feeds, emergency broadcasts, even personal terminals. No theatrics, just her standing against a backdrop of fire-lit steel. "You thought we'd beg," she said flatly. "You thought we'd roll over like the rest, but you misjudged us." She leaned closer to the camera, her voice colder now. "When you killed our miners, you thought you were silencing a problem. What you really did was wake up a graveyard." She turned slightly, showing the names engraved on the wall behind her, thousands of them. Not soldiers, not heroes, just people, civilians, workers, children. "We came to get them back. Now we're staying to bury the ones who took them." Then she nodded just once. "Fire!" The orbital rail guns hummed, and in one unified roar they spoke. 7 tungsten rods, each the size of a skyscraper, dropped from orbit. No explosives needed. The sheer velocity turned them into planetary knives, slicing the capital's spire into dust. It collapsed in a soundless flash from space, but the ground told a different story. Shock waves rippled for miles, glass shattered, towers folded, ash clouded the sky. The Valnari High Command died in seconds, along with every last official who had signed the order to shoot down Earth's probe. Cirque didn't die there, though. He had already evacuated, but not out of cowardice. He had seen this coming. He'd watched Earth's fury rise like a tidal wave and knew there was no stopping it, only surviving it long enough to understand why. From a small bunker far from the blast zone, he stood watching the clouds of smoke cover his city, the spires, the Song Gardens, the museums, all of it now rubble. "Is this victory to them?" one of his aides whispered. "Genocide," Cirque shook his head. "No, this isn't genocide," he murmured. "It's a lesson, and they were the example." But the worst part wasn't the destruction, it was the silence that followed. Earth didn't celebrate. There were no chants, no declarations of triumph, just the deep, still quiet of something final. They didn't want parades or surrender, they wanted closure. And closure didn't leave anything standing. A new feed crackled through the emergency line. "Another message, Maravos again." "This is not peace," she said. "This is the pause before we move on." And that was when Syrax knew they weren't just punishing the Valnari, they were warning everyone else. Across the galaxy, silence fell like a blanket of fear. From the icy cities of the Aral Confederation to the lush nebula colonies of the Zenturi Accord, every species with a communications array had seen the broadcast. Some didn't believe it at first, thought it was propaganda or deep-faked terror theater. But when the orbital sensors confirmed the obliteration of the Valnari capital in real time, There was no more doubt. Earth hadn't won a war. Earth had made a statement. In the Galactic Union Hall, delegates from over 60 species gathered in an emergency session. No formal speeches, no pleasantries, just whispered panic and trembling claws typing messages to home worlds. The Valnari chair sat empty, still smoldering from the symbol of their vaporized empire, the shattered emblem of a once feared species now reduced to dust. "Have the humans sent demands?" asked High Speaker Trevin of the Zentury, her wings twitching. "They haven't sent anything," growled a Gathi elder. "Just silence like they're waiting." A trembling AI from the Binar Collective offered an analysis, its voice glitching as if even it feared speaking. "They erased a galactic superpower in 8 days, minimal losses, no occupation. This wasn't conquest, it was retaliation, surgical and symbolic. And it was efficient," Trevin snapped. "They dropped orbital spears on civilians." "No," the AI corrected. "They dropped orbital spears on decision-makers." The humans knew exactly where to strike, the civilians. They warned them 3 hours prior. Gasps rippled through the hall. It was true, Earth had sent automated evacuation codes to every non-military sector. Evac pod bays were unlocked, transit routes cleared. They didn't want to kill everyone, just the ones responsible. But the ones who stayed, well, Earth had made it clear. Stay with your leaders or leave them to burn. And now Earth's ships were motionless, still in orbit around Jarthrith. They weren't advancing. They weren't pulling back, just waiting. Then the humans sent a message, only 4 words. No ambassador, no context, just text burned into every Union channel like a scar. "Who's next?" To try the effect was instant. The Trelawney Empire declared neutrality within the hour. The Dra Confederates, once vocal about humanity's uncontrolled aggression, signed a non-aggression pact and offered tribute. The Zorathi Syndicate, who had once considered enslaving Earth during their Preft Age, publicly erased all records of that plan and issued an apology broadcast across 10 systems. The galaxy didn't just fear Earth now, they respected it, because for the first time in centuries the unspoken rule had been broken. Empires could no longer act with impunity. Power wasn't protection anymore. Humanity had taught the stars something ancient, something primal. If you corner a species that has survived its own extinction more than once, it will teach you what desperation looks like, with a gun in its hand. Back on Earth, the mood wasn't celebratory, it was quiet, heavy. Captain Mara Voss walked through a memorial hall where the names of the lost shimmered across stone panels, endless and sacred. Children's toys sat at the base of some miners' helmets, burnt patches of uniforms. It was all there, preserved not as a reminder of war, but of why they went to war. A young ensign walked beside her, hesitant. "Ma'am, was it worth it?" She didn't answer right away. Outside, people were rebuilding, ships docked, farmers tilled artificial fields again. Earth wasn't richer or safer, but it was heard. "Mara," she finally said, "they need to learn." The ensign frowned. "Learn what?" "That humans might die standing," she said, her voice low, "but we never kneel." And somewhere in the far edges of the galaxy, another species watched and took notes. The galaxy didn't sleep anymore. Not after Earth's vengeance scorched an empire to ashes and dared the stars to speak back. Every major species, once bold and bloated with self-importance, now moved with caution. Words were measured, fleets withdrawn, ambassadors trained in new protocols, all built around a single terrifying truth. Earth had changed the rules. No longer the backwater, no longer the quaint, primitive world climbing its way through the stars. Number 1, Earth had shown the universe it wasn't just a player. It was a warning etched in fire. But power never exists in a vacuum, and not everyone watched in fear. In the murky edges of the Lydian Shroud, where cartels ruled and ethics died, the Shiv Syndicate held court in rusted mega-stations built from stolen fleets. They trafficked species, sold weapons to rebels and kings alike, and prided themselves on one principle: no one could touch them. They were ghosts in the dark, untouchable. So when Earth's fleet wiped the Valnari off the map, the Syndicate didn't bow. They laughed. "An emotional display," hissed Overseer Vesh, the cold-blooded leader, his voice like razors dragging on glass. "Humans lack discipline. They strike with heart, not calculation. Rage is not strategy." His underlings nodded, more out of fear than agreement. The humans left Jarthrith intact. Vesh continued. "They didn't harvest, didn't loot, they burned and moved on, a waste to Vesh. Earth was a hammer, brutal, loud, and easily misled, and hammers could be baited, that was the plan. The Syndicate would hit something small, not Earth directly, of course. That would be stupid. but something close enough to provoke, just enough to test the edges of their fury. So they chose Caller 7, a border colony co-managed by humans and a few minor species. It had a defense grid, modest trade, and more importantly, it was known to house descendants of Earth's diaspora, people with human blood, human names. The Sheev hit it without warning. No broadcasts, no ransom. They sterilized the orbit, turned the food reserves into slag, then landed to make a statement. No weapons, just poison gas, burned flags, and a message carved into the ground. Come find us. And Earth did. But this time they didn't send a fleet. They sent one ship, just one. It arrived without lights, without fanfare, a black craft no larger than a cruiser bearing no official markings. But the moment it entered the Lydian shroud, every Sheev listening post went silent, and those that tried to track its path simply vanished. Vesh didn't understand at first. He paced his throne room, frustrated, waiting for retaliation that never came. "Cowards!" he snarled, too broken to respond. But then, slowly, reports began to drift in. First, Sheev outposts hundreds of light years apart were going dark within minutes of each other. Then black box recordings of something breaching their shields without touching them, like shadows melting through bulkheads, no explosions, no firefights, just screams. Then silence. Then the name, Project Revenant. It was whispered across the black market networks, panicked voices over encrypted lines, no images, no survivors, only a growing pattern where the Sheev had laid their trap. Earth had sent something far worse than a fleet. They had sent ghosts. Vesh panicked, ordered a retreat, pulled all assets from Calera and beyond, but it was too late. The Revenant didn't come with ships, it came with a message, beamed into every Shiv ship simultaneously. Vesh included a woman's voice, calm, steady, familiar. "Captain Mara Voss, you asked us to come," she said. "You burned our blood, marked your message in our soil." A pause, then colder. "Now we mark you." And then it began. One by one, Vesh's stations were hacked, not for control, but for humiliation. Every file, every sale, every brutal secret of the Shiv Empire was broadcast to the entire galactic net. Names, faces, deals, slavery contracts, species blackmail. It was no longer about vengeance, it was exposure. In less than 48 hours, the syndicate collapsed, not by missile or torpedo, but by truth. And still the black ship hovered above their last station. Vesh stood trembling on his deck, watching as his empire bled out. His last words, before a silence unlike any other swallowed the feed, were bitter. "They didn't kill us, they unmade us." Back on Earth, in a dim command room beneath the Atlantic archology, Maravo stood with her arms crossed. Her officers waited for orders, for applause, for some sign that this mission was over. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. Instead, she looked out the viewport at a swirling galaxy that had learned something dangerous. Humanity no longer needed armies to fight wars, they only needed a reason. The galaxy was changing, and Earth stood at the center of it. No longer a junior race begging for scraps, no longer a planet dismissed in backroom treaties. After Jarth burned and the Shiv Syndicate was dismantled by whispers,